Hey Vaughn Elementary, good morning. I hope you guys are doing well. I'm Andi McNair, and Tanya asked me to share a little bit with you guys this morning, and I wish I could be there in person, but I am headed out to share Genius Hour in a district, and I wanted to take some time to talk to you guys, and I'm so excited about sharing with you guys. I'm excited. I think the beginning of a new school year is always exciting. I think today is your second day back, but I will say, as I made that statement, I know that some of you were like, not so much, right? And I was there. I taught for 17 years before I left the classroom to share with teachers and do some other cool stuff. But I was there. I was in a place. I understand those of you that aren't super stoked about being back at school this year. There were probably 10 or 12 years that when I went back to school every year, I was just going back to work, right? It was just a job. So I wasn't really excited about being back. By the way, you guys are going to have to excuse the bird noises. I'm recording outside because my kids are asleep inside, my teenage kids, and I didn't want to wake them up. I'm a loud talker. But the exciting news is my last 5 years of teaching, I was always really excited about the first days of school. And the reason I was excited is because I became a passionate teacher. My mindset changed, and I kind of saw education for what it could be. And so I wanted to share a little bit of my story with you guys. There was a day that I was teaching class, and as I was teaching, I looked out at my students, and I noticed that they were doing one of three things, right? They either had their head down on their desk, they had that glazed over look in their eyes where they were being super compliant, but I knew that what I was doing wasn't meaningful, or they were talking to their neighbor, right? So nobody was engaged. I was just standing up there talking. I might as well have been talking to a brick wall. So I drove home that day and I was reflecting. That was probably the first time I really reflected on my teaching practices. And as I drove home, it was like somebody took the blinders off and I could see my classroom really for what it was and not for what I wanted it to be. And so as I drove home that day, I was really upset because I realized that what I was doing was not meaningful for my students. And I always say, if what you're doing in your classroom isn't meaningful for your students, it's a waste of your time and theirs. And I say that because of this experience. I realized that what I was doing was not meaningful. And so I drove home that night, and I was a connected educator, sort of. I wasn't near as connected as I am now, but I was playing around on Twitter, and I got on there and I started looking at some cool things that educators were doing, and it was so exciting. I mean, I was reading how people were doing passion-based learning, something called Genius Hour. They were doing maker spaces and all of this cool stuff that was happening in education, and it was very clear that a huge shift is coming, right? And I had no idea, and I started getting excited, and long story short, I decided to dive into passion-based learning and Genius Hour with my students. And so I taught the last 5 years really kind of diving into my students' passions and letting them learn based on those passions. Sounds crazy, right? There's no better way to teach. It was so much fun. But through that experience, I think I learned some things, and I wanted to share some of those things with you. So I think that through that, I kind of learned that every student deserves three things, right? First of all, every student deserves the benefit of the doubt. Regardless of what students walk through your door next week or whenever they come back, every one of them deserve a fresh start. We all know how the game is played, right? I mean, you get your class list and somebody's going to come tell you, oh, poor you got that kid, or oh my goodness, you're so lucky you got that kid. The reality is they're all just kids, and they're all just trying to find their way in this big world like the rest of us. So I think it's important that every kid gets a fresh start, and that you realize that every student that walks through that door brings something to the table, right? You just got to figure out what that is and how you're going to use it. One way to do that is just practical, just a little practical advice here. There's a tool called Thrively, and it allows you to know what your students are interested in and know their strengths by just taking this short little test. So Thrively.com, great first day of school activity. I also think that every student deserves learning that fits, right? I always give the example of if we walked into a store and went to buy blue jeans and they had one size, one style, what would we do? We would turn around and walk out, right? Unfortunately, our kids, they don't get the opportunity to turn around and walk out. If the learning is too big, if they don't understand it and it's too big for them, they have to sit there and take it. If the learning is too small, if it's something they already know, something they've already mastered, something they could actually stand up and teach the class, they have to sit there and take it. that's not okay, right? I mean, we have to find a way to make the learning fit for every student. So one size fits all definitely is not working anymore. I'm not sure it ever worked. I think we just have to change our definition of working. And then finally, I think every student deserves meaningful learning. And you know, we have that conversation all the time, like, what is meaningful learning? That's such a big term. I think meaningful learning really does three things, right? It empowers and engages the learner, so it helps them really be engaged instead of just being compliant, right? Compliant classrooms are not what we're looking for anymore, right? In education, we really want students that are engaged. We really want students that are empowered to own their own learning, because that's what the real world is going to require them to do. So I think that students can be engaged and empowered and still learn the standards for sure. And then I think students have to be able to make connections, right? That's part of meaningful learning, making connections to the learning. And how do you do that? I think that mainly making connections to the standards, connecting the standards with real life. And one way you can do that is through outside experts, right? If you're going to tell a kid they use this in the real world, bring somebody in from the real world to talk about that. If you're talking about area and perimeter, I always say bring in an architect. But just help them make connections. That makes it meaningful. And then I think finally, meaningful learning helps them deepen their understanding. It gets past that surface level understanding and really helps them deepen their understanding of topics, and they want to deepen it if it's meaningful to them, but it has to be meaningful to them, not necessarily to us. So I think that as you guys start this school year, first of all, I hope that you guys have an amazing school year. I hope that you are excited to be there, but I want to say, even if you aren't, you can find your passion for teaching again. I would say just as your students come into your classroom this year, see it as focus on your ultimate accountability, right? We all have accountabilities. We're accountable to the test, we're accountable to our admin, we're accountable to parents. But the reality is our ultimate accountability is to those kids who walk into the classroom. The kids that come through your door every morning, that is who your ultimate accountability is to. So do what's best for them. Find your joy for teaching again. I hope you guys have an amazing 2017-2018 school year. If you guys want to connect with me on Twitter, it's at McNair AN3. I would love to hear from you guys. I hope Vaughn Elementary just kills it this year. I hope you guys have a great year. I hope that I get to talk to you guys at some point in person. But have a great year, have a great morning, have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.